I'm Jim Lloyd, and we're at the Crabbit Orchard Museum in Tazwell, Virginia, and they've got my instruments on display here, so we're about 3/4 of my instrument collection. So sit back for the next little bit and we're going to do a walkthrough of our instruments. This is the guitar that started it all for me. This was my grandmother's guitar. My grandfather got back home in 1947 from World War II, and as a coming home gift from my grandmother, he bought this guitar. It's a Harmony partition. This was the very top of the line Harmony, and he also decided she needed to be electrified, so he bought the D'Armond guitar mic, which was an accessory to electrify your guitar. These were slang named monkey on a stick pickup, and you could slide your pickup up and down to create the different tones, but he bought her this used, and it went through her lifespan with it. And when my dad married my mother, my grandmother gave it to him as a wedding gift, and she had tried to keep it in good shape, but it had become scuffed up and all that sort of thing. So my dad decided he would refinish it, which he stripped it, and then there it sat. So she took it back several years later. They did some trading on something, and she got it back, and she refinished it, and she put varnish and stuff on it about that thick. So it was too thick. Well, when I started playing, this was the guitar that I would sneak in the room and play because I wasn't allowed to touch it and all that stuff. So even after I really started playing out seriously, it was on loan. So finally, I was probably in my 30s, my late 30s, and my grandfather gave me the guitar. Well, by then it really did need to be refinished. So we went by his memory and we refinished it in a sunburst, which is not correct. It wasn't the way he remembered it. It should have been blonde. So it's kind of a customized version, but this is the guitar that started it all for me. This is the first one I played, and it's been with me, all my life. This guitar is a 1937 Gibson L00, and it's in remarkable condition. This one is very special to me, let's put it like that, because this guitar was purchased in the barber shop in Rural Retreat in 1937. The barber, Stuart Miller, was a Gibson dealer, and I now have that barber shop. So it's got a tie like that, but the lady that bought it, her name was Mary Huddle, and her daddy bought it for her in 37, and she was thrilled to have this guitar. But she said she found out they were having to make payments on it, and it was unbelievable, the payments. This guitar was $27 when she purchased it brand new, and that's without a case. But she said they thought they'd never get paid for it because the payments were just on and on and on for $27. Now Mary got older, and I would go by her house. Arthritis had got her fingers, and I would go by her house occasionally, and I'd play the guitar for her. And she had purchased a case with the guitar, so when you got done playing it, it went back in the case, and she had a little quilt that she had made to cover the case up with. So this guitar was very well cared for all its life, and when Mary died, I played it at her funeral. And her son inherited the guitar, and a few years later he died, and I played it at his funeral, and his widow let me purchase the guitar. This is a 1954 Gibson RB250 Master Tone that my great uncle Buddy Pennington purchased in 1954. He gave $150 for this banjo, and my great grandfather absolutely hit the roof at $150 for that. Buddy was playing on 2 radio stations. He was playing on WRIC in Richlands, Virginia, which is right over the hill here, and WHIS over in Bluefield, Virginia. Or that might be West Virginia. Anyway, and he attracted some attention. He was quite a banjo player. He ended up playing with Bill Monroe from 1958 to 1960. There's a picture of him with Monroe's band here. And of course, Uncle Buddy died in the early 70s, and his son decided to sell the banjo years later, and we'd lost contact with them, and they didn't even know I played. And I stumbled upon this for sale at a fiddler's convention. And I took a picture of it, and I sent it to my mother, and I said, they're claiming this is Uncle Buddy's banjo, is it? And she said, yes, I was with him when he bought it. So that was his. These two banjos here are of English origin for the most part. Now, the banjo was introduced to England by Joel Sweeney, who was a Virginia boy. He did command performances for the King and Queen of England, 1840s, 1850s, somewhere through there. And it was a big secret how the banjo was constructed. So when he would come off stage, they would put the banjo in a case and lock it up and wouldn't allow anyone to see it. Well, one of his people, his troop members, was bribed by an English guy who came in with a cabinet maker. They got to spend like 30 minutes with the banjo and take measurements and drawings and all that stuff. So that's how the banjo was introduced over there. Sweeney fired the troop member over it, but they kind of did some progressive stuff. These are 5 strings, but the string goes through a hole and comes out up here instead of the short string like the Americans have on it. And F.C. Wilkes had this innovative thing like a sound hole. It really doesn't work good, but it was very innovative for the day. This banjo also has what's called an internal resonator that fits into the back. It's a pretty cool idea. This one here was, well, the pot's American pot, and I don't have any idea what brand this is. It's probably around 1900, 1910. And then the neck is from the Windsor Banjo Company in England. I was over there and found the neck and put it with this banjo. This was the main banjo I played for years. And it's got the tunnel neck that the string goes in here and comes out here. The interesting thing about the Windsor Banjo Company, they were bombed during World War II and never opened back up. The Germans really didn't like banjos, apparently. This is a Vega, a 1925 Vega, and the model was White Lady, and that's W-H-I-T-E-L-A-D-I-E. And this was the flagship of the Vega company for a lot of years. Then they came out with something called a tubaphone. But the White Ladies were very, very popular, 1900, somewhere through there, up through the 20s. Vega was the major banjo company in the United States, and they're wonderful instruments to play, but they had very fancy abalone inlay in them. And the heel on this is also carved. You can't really see, you have to look at this picture here, but they were hand carved with designs on them. Just a beautiful instrument. This is a cigar box fiddle, and one of the things about having a fiddle is they're very fragile. So a lot of them got broke up, and Appalachians, being Appalachians, never threw anything away. So people would keep the neck or whatever they could salvage off of it. And a lot of people started making these out of cigar boxes. So they would mount their fiddle neck on an existing cigar box, and that was their instrument. And they sound pretty bad, but it was better than nothing. This is a Boucher banjo. We would say Boucher, but it's a Boucher. William Boucher Jr. was a drum maker and an instrument dealer in Baltimore, Maryland. He was the first major manufacturer of banjos. The Sweeneys, Joel Sweeney and Sam Sweeney, and the famous Sweeney family that were banjo players used his instruments. This is a really good example of the first mass manufactured. When I got this, the pot of the banjo was all to pieces, and I had to have another one of those made, but the hardware is original and the neck is original. These were gut-stringed instruments, which the strings were actually made of sheep intestines, leather top, hide, and there's fewer than 50 of these left. They're very rare, very hard to come by, and it's very cantankerous to try to tune it and all that, but it was the state of the art in the 1840s. The Martin Guitar Company was founded in 1833, and it is the oldest guitar manufacturer in the United States, and it's become synonymous with bluegrass music. This is an 1850 Style 3. They're very rare, and that is the original case with it. Once again, just like the fiddles, they were so fragile. Not a lot of them survived, and this also has the gut strings on it. If you put steel strings on this, it would cave in, and that's what happened to a lot of them. When steel strings started coming in the 1870s, more and more people were going toward that than the gut strings, so a lot of them were destroyed. It's a wonderful little guitar, Brazilian rosewood and French polish, and it's a pretty interesting thing. This was from my neighborhood, my region in Southwest Virginia. So, and it was intact. It was all there, and the case was still lined and everything. The harmonicas began being mass-produced in Germany in the 1840s, and they were incredibly popular up through the American Civil War. They were compact, they were very entertaining, they were fairly easy to learn to play, so it became one of America's favorite instruments for a long time. This is a good example of a lot of different types of harmonicas. So you had some with bells on them, and you had some with trumpets on them, and this multiple harmonica rack here that you could spin around to get the key that you desired to be in, up to these big ones like this that were bass harmonicas, even down to the little bitty ones. Now this rack right here was made so that you could play a banjo or a guitar with it while playing a harmonica. I'm not that coordinated, there's no way I could do that, but some people can. In the 1880s, mail order really started taking off. So the company Sears and Roebuck was founded, and you could buy everything from Sears, from a bow tie to a house. They would ship the stuff in on rail, and they had pages of musical instruments with harmonicas or whatever. But these two banjos were Sears brands. This is an Acme, and this one is a Super Tone. And the bottom price banjo in these catalogs around this time, they're both around 1915. So you could buy a banjo for $2.75. And the more brackets they had on them, the more expensive they were, plus the celluloid inlay. This banjo's backstory is pretty interesting. You know, I get asked all the time, where did I find this and that? And this banjo was online at a music store. And I tried to pay for it with my credit card, and it wouldn't go through, and I went ahead and paid for it with PayPal, and didn't really pay any attention to it. I thought it was some kind of glitch in the system. Well, the bank called me within a half hour and said, somebody's doing credit card fraud on you. And I said, well, how do you know that? And he said, well, were you in Amsterdam this morning? I said, no, but I bought a banjo from there. I didn't realize the banjo was in Amsterdam. So that one came a long way to get back to me. But it was you don't see many of these survive with the vine inlay up the neck. And like I say, this is a celluloid material. They were both metal-clad pots, and not the best banjo in the world, but once again, better than nothing. And considering that this banjo was probably $5.75 new, that was the top of the line Sears. So this whole wall here are handmade banjos from different locations. This style here was very popular in Virginia and North Carolina, or Southwest Virginia and North Carolina, the round. This one was found in Swords Creek, Virginia. This one was found in Russell County. They were just a different take. You had a smaller head, and most of these were made 1890, 1900, somewhere through there. I found this one in Statesville, North Carolina, and this is an old tack head. This one has a really unique history behind it. There's a junkyard in Rural Retreat, or what there was a junkyard in Rural Retreat, and they were crushing cars. Well, they go through the cars and check them before they crush them, and they had a car that they had bought in from Bland County, Virginia, and they opened up the trunk of the car, and this banjo was laying in the trunk. And the boys at the junkyard knew that I fooled with this stuff, so they bought it up to me, and I ended up purchasing it from them. But there was a maker in Bland County that did make these, look like a kitchen clock from the 1890s. I've seen a few others with this design on there from Bland County. So it was probably out of the 1930s. This banjo was given to me by my friend Greg Smith down in Beech Mountain, North Carolina. And it belonged to Ray Hicks, whose picture we have here. Ray was a storyteller, and the Hickses were documented a lot by Library of Congress for their storytelling and instrument maker. Stanley Hicks was Ray's cousin, and he was a banjo maker, and I'm almost sure that this was made by Stanley. There's not a signature on it anywhere, but it would make sense that he would make his brother a banjo. And then once again, we have the round hide, like I was talking about, that was so prevalent with the wood rim in Virginia, North Carolina. I would say, though, that this one was made in the 1930s. It just held on to what they knew and continued with the tradition of how they were making. The Jew's harp is in every indigenous culture all over the world. They were everywhere. I've seen them in archaeological digs from the pyramids. They're still big in the Vietnamese culture. They still play them regularly. Most people in the United States don't get past the weird noise stage, the boing. But around 1900, this was the most popular instrument in America. This display here goes, the oldest one is probably out of the 1700s, and there's several in this box from the 1860s, and there's a real important one in here. My grandfather's Jew's harp is in here, and that was the very first instrument that I was allowed to fool with. There's also an instructional booklet from Carson Robinson that taught you how to play one, but there are a lot of different variations and shapes, and I'm always on the lookout for a new one of these. Occasionally I do find one, but there's only so many shapes that they have. So this is probably the biggest collection of them I've ever seen in one spot. The most fragile part of a banjo was the neck, and of course they got broken on a regular basis due to falling off your horse, or your wife smashing it, or just maybe alcohol would have something to do with it, maybe a bar fight. So these two banjos have homemade necks on them. This is an 1860s pot that they've made the neck for, and what's really interesting about this, to make the tailpiece that the string's attached to, that's made from an employee's badge. Now, I found this down in, it was in Wythe County, but I have no idea what factory this was from. I can't find out anything about it. This one is also in 1860s that the neck's been changed on, or 1890s, I'm sorry. So 1890s, the neck's been changed on. And I'd never seen a neck like this when I found this. And it, you know, it's got this here, and there's a bolt up here, a bump, and then this very unusual dowel piece. And couldn't figure it out, and finally it hit me. This is a table leg. This is a wood dowel out of a chair. They would repair with whatever they had, whatever they could. And a lot of the southern players especially would coat the fingerboard with copper to make it fretless, you know, to make it slide better and smoother. And so this is a copper clad one too. But I wonder if somebody got mad about their table being taken out. The original banjos from the beginning, which they were introduced in south side of Virginia, north side of North Carolina, came over from Africa, and it was a gourd instrument, and they had 3 long strings and 1 short string. The 4th string got added in the 1800s. There's a claim that Joel Sweeney, the famous banjo player, added it. Some people believe that, some people don't. I don't know which way it went, but they were fretless until you started seeing frets around the late 1860s. So when the frets came in big time, a lot of the players didn't like them. You know, they were used to playing fretless. So what they would do is pull the frets out like this and continue to play it, or they'd pull the frets out and put copper on it so your fingers would slide good. This banjo belonged to Jimmy Huddle of Wythe County, Virginia. It had been Jimmy's grandfather, and his grandfather was definitely an old-time player. He had pulled the strings out, and he had gone New Year's Eve in 1930. He was playing with his brother, and he was walking home, and a car hit him and killed him, and he was carrying his banjo with him. And the banjo laid in the case for years and years, and finally Jimmy gave this to me, and I've left it just the way it was. It's been played to death. You can see it's wallowed out right there from the lack of the frets. This is among the very favorites out of my collection, and it's an 1860s, and this was from Ararat, Virginia. And the necks, you know, would wear out from the fingernails and stuff. Like I said on the other banjo, it was gorded out, or rotted out, or whatever you want to call it. So a lot of the players would take and repair these any way they could. They've taken a piece of bone and mortised it in here and put one little screw in there. But I mean, it's fitted in that neck. It just exactly, somebody was a great worker to be able to work with wood and bone like that. But the family lore on this banjo, it belonged to a fellow who went into the Civil War, and he was wounded, and he ended up at one of the vast hospitals with thousands of people, and the family decided they would go find him, and they went to the hospital, and there were lots of people and no records of who was where and that sort of thing. So they decided just to walk around. They walked around until they heard a banjo playing, and there he sat with his banjo. So they brought him home after that. He was discharged from the Army, but that one's got quite a bit of history to it, plus the work on it. Pretty incredible. In the pre-microphone world, loud was always a problem. You were never loud enough. As the crowd started getting bigger and bigger, 1890s, more and more people coming out, especially in urban areas, it was just never loud enough. So they started doing weird things like this. Now this is a Stroh violin. Stroh designed this thing that was supposed to put more volume out. It was, the slang for it's a horn fiddle, and they were made from 1890 to 1925. And by then microphones are getting more and more prominent. A lot of people like to record with them because you could zero in on the sound instead of being all over the place. Another term for them is gypsy violin, because the gypsies really liked the volume from it. They're getting to be harder and harder to find. I found that in York, England. And then this aluminum violin, you know, there's always been people that march to a different drummer, and I think there will always be people that march to a different drummer. A lot of people decide they want to make something that hadn't been done before and that sort of thing. So this fellow named T.E. Evans, and I really don't know who he was. T.E. Evans decided he would make an aluminum fiddle in 1937. He dated it, put his name down on it, and he has seen a fiddle from Mittenbow, because the Mittenbow fiddles all had a lion's head carved on them, and he's tried to put a lion's head on the peg head of this. And you can't really see it, but there's all kinds of engraving on this with little flowers and that sort of thing. This was donated by James Pressgraves in Rural Retreat, an old friend of mine, and he was as fascinated by it as I am. This is a Bradley Kincaid Hound Dog guitar, and historically this is a really important piece for people to see. Bradley Kincaid was a radio singer, and he was on the WLS Barn Dance in Chicago in the late 1920s. WLS was owned by Sears, and I've already discussed how Sears manufactured the banjos and the houses, and by this time you could even buy cars from Sears, and they would ship it right into you on the railroad. And if you didn't have gas, they would ship you gas too. So WLS, and this is the first example of this that I know of, WLS decided they would manufacture a guitar because they owned the Harmony Guitar Company. So Kincaid was getting so popular, Kincaid had traded a dog, a hound dog, for his first guitar. So Harmony Guitar for Sears made the Bradley Kincaid Hound Dog signature guitar, and for $7 you could order this, and it came with a songbook and a pick. I don't have one of the picks, but all that for $7, and Bradley himself would push them on the air, so it was a really masterful piece of marketing. This is one that's not with the display, and the reason it's not with the display is because this is the one I play all the time. And this is a wonderful representation of the golden era of banjo manufacturing as far as I'm concerned. This was made by Gibson, and it was called a Bella Voce, which means beautiful voice. They had started doing engraving on them. By the late 20s, all the way up through the mid-30s, they were heavily engraved and gold plated, which a lot of the gold is worn off of this, and they were hand carved. This one is pretty rare because it's made of Brazilian rosewood. So you've got the Brazilian rosewood, you've got the custom binding, the carving, the engraving, the gold. None of these were 5-string. And like so many banjos out of this era, the predominant instrument was a 4-string, a tenor banjo or a plectrum banjo. So the neck, when I got this, had just about been destroyed, so we converted it to a 5-string, and you'll see a lot of this done. A lot of the old instruments were converted because 5-string is more popular now than it was in the 20s. But this is my very favorite banjo. This banjo was $500 in 1928. A Model A Ford Coupe was $495 in 1928. So that gives you an idea. If you really wanted one of these, you really sacrificed for it. And all the manufacturers made fancy stuff like this. Paramount and Gibson and Vega, all of them made the gold plated and engraved. But by the mid-30s, it was really disappearing because the Depression, people just could not afford an instrument like this. This was in Manhattan, New York, and I found it, and like I say, it was in horrible shape, and I've restored it. This is the original overlay off the peg head, though. And these were called bouquets. It was supposed to be a bouquet of flowers, but people being people, when they saw it, they said, well, it's not a bouquet, it's ice cream cone. So it's called an ice cream cone headstock now. That's my madness, hanging on the walls, and much to my wife's agreement to get it out of the house for a little while. I need to thank the Tazwell Museum, the Crab Orchard Museum, for allowing me to do the display here, and we need to thank Junior Appalachian Musicians for sponsoring this in part. I am Program Director for Junior Appalachian Musicians. Junior Appalachian Musicians is now in 5 states, and we teach kids Appalachian music and Appalachian culture. A lot of times I'll take part of the collection in and talk to the kids about it. You can check us out at juniorappalachianmusicians.org. If you have any questions or comments about anything you've seen, drop me a line at jimlloydmusic@gmail.com. And hope you've enjoyed the tour.